Hi, my name is Phil. I'd like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss a letter sent by the government in response to the Good Law Project's investigation into the awarding of nearly £1 million to associates of Dominic Cummings, which essentially says, none of your business if we break the law. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, the government, under COVID cover, have been awarding billions of pounds worth of contracts to companies without the usual procurement procedures being followed. That is, throwing them out for tender, getting quotes, having a look at who's got the best offer and going with them, in order to make sure that our public money is being spent in the best interest of us and for getting the best return. Now, in many of these cases, the money was completely lost on no goods or services being provided at all. Obviously, very famously, there was the tracing app. Nothing happened with that. There's an awful lot of PPE as well that we haven't got, that we paid for. More suitable companies were not invited to take part in many of these bids. The contracts were simply awarded. They were just given to people on whatever basis. Now, many of these contracts, even though they resulted in a lot of public money being spent for no return, were at least supposed to be for goods and services related to the coronavirus emergency. The government have therefore argued that with their emergency powers, it can ignore the normal procurement procedures because, we haven't got time, so we'll just have to do it quickly. They also use that as an excuse for when they end up with nothing at the end of it. Oh, well, we had to make a decision really quickly. We had to, some of it was high risk. We just had to do it. It was an emergency. They're using those sorts of excuses. However, there was one contract for £840,000, which is peanuts compared to many of the others. And this was for Brexit research, not coronavirus. So as such, there'd be no justification at all for issuing the contract without following the normal procurement procedures using those emergency COVID powers. In addition, the contract was awarded the start of March, so that's before the government acknowledged this as an emergency, but it was just formalised later on as well, which just in itself is very dodgy. And that's why I think that this particular contract, although it represents a relatively small amount of public money fraud, is being subject to determined legal challenge because potentially, I talked about this before, it might be like an Al Capone thing. It may be easier to prove the wrongdoing. So in this vein, the Good Law Project, which is the group of solicitors who most notably last year were involved in helping to scupper the government's unlawful prorogation of Parliament, have sought a judicial review over the government's behaviour in awarding this and other contracts. And it's based on the concern that an awful lot of government contracts, representing, of course, taxpayers' money, our money, is going to people closely associated with Dominic Cummings. I mean, it's not just happened once or twice, it's happening a lot. But this particular contract, worth, as I say, £840,000, was awarded on March the 3rd, like I said, before coronavirus was considered an emergency by the government. But they only made it public in June. And this didn't, again, there was no, we need some people to provide us with this service. It was like a polling service. Anyone interested, it's worth £840,000 type thing, or come with your best bids. We want this amount of work being done. There was none of that. They just gave it to this friend of Dominic Cummings and Michael Gove, senior cabinet minister. Now, the main thrust of the argument is, in the words of the Good Law Project, money for your mates on a handshake, formalised later, is unlawful. That is basically their argument. Now, I'm going to put a description in or rather a link in the description below for those who want to read all the documentation on the case, because it's all there. What I want to really talk about is the response from the government, because it's a little strange. Now, at the end of last week, they replied with a letter to the Good Law Project. It's from the Treasury, it's from a Treasury solicitor, suggesting that the group did not have sufficient standing to pursue a judicial review. Now, the first reason they gave for this is as follows. They say, this is, in substance, a procurement challenge GLP, Good Law Project, accepts as much because it has now issued a claim by reference to the time limit set out in blah blah blah. However, no challenge has been received from any economic operator. The court should not grant permission for a challenge by way of judicial review when there has been no challenge under the relevant legislation by a directly affected party. So what they're saying is any of the people who could have sought that contract if it went public haven't publicly complained. Now, we know, of course, that if they had, there would definitely be a case for this to come to court. In fact, it would go to court. We saw that with Chris Grayling's failed ferry project, didn't we? When he awarded a contract, again, without going through the normal procedures, awarded a contract for a ferry service post-Brexit to a company that had no ferries and no experience of dealing with ferries. They were sued by a company that could have delivered this service, and the government lost. So that's what they're arguing there. But the Good Law Project maintain that the government are aggressively punishing companies if they publicly complain about being cut out of the running for these contracts, because the government are threatening them. Well, if you complain about this, you're out of the running for any other contracts that will come up. So in other words, they're being forced into silence. So the fact that providers have not made a fuss does not in itself mean that no other providers would have been interested in the contract. And that's what matters. It doesn't really matter whether other providers want to make a fuss or not. What matters is this a good use of public money? And if you can't even prove that it was done for the lowest cost or for the best service for the same amount of money, then we have a right to say what's going on here. Their second reason, the government's second reason for saying that the Good Law Project shouldn't be interfering is, and again I'll quote, even if a challenge to the award of the contract by way of judicial review were appropriate, Good Law Project lacks the necessary direct interest. It is merely a campaigning group with no special interest in the communication sector and, in particular, the means by the services that are the subject of the contract are procured. No other more directly affected group has sought to challenge the arrangements put in place by the Secretary of State. There is no basis upon which Good Law Project should be permitted to intervene in arrangements which have not been challenged by any more directly affected party. In other words, mind your own business. But here's the thing. Now, I'm not a legal expert. I'm not saying that this should definitely go to judicial review. I'm not a judge. I'm not even a senior barrister. But I do follow political news quite closely, and have done so for many years. And there have been many times in my life when judicial reviews have been sought and granted by what are essentially concerned members of the public. The bottom line is that this is public money, paid for by British taxpayers. It's our money. And procurement rules exist so that we can have confidence that our money has been spent in our best interest, that there aren't conflicts of interest interfering in it. It's not the government's money, although they are taxpayers. At least I hope they are. The point is that we do not give the government money, although they behave as if we do. They simply decide the policies which will inform the priorities which will apply in the spending of that money. But just handing it over to your friends is not deciding a policy. They aren't elected to do what they like with the money. They set policy, and then they have to stick by that policy. What they are doing is just taking money and giving it to people that they like. And as a result, any British taxpayer has a right to have this investigated if they believe it's unlawful. Also in the letter, the government refers to the fact that the Good Law Project wants to combine the case with another dodgy contract award that I've talked about in the past. This was the one, I think it was 108 million or something from memory, a much larger sum, certainly the 840,000, to a pest control firm that employs 16 people to provide over £100 million worth of medical equipment that they do not manufacture or even trade in. The government also emphasised the emergency nature of the coronavirus pandemic in the awarding of the contracts. But, like I say, this has nothing to do with this particular claim because it was for Brexit-related services. So essentially, the response from the Treasury is, this is none of your business. We can do what we like. So if you'd kindly care to piss off, that'll make it easier for everyone involved and stop wasting any more of our valuable time and money. However, what the letter does not do is give any reasons why the award of the contract was lawful. So the result of this is that a claim is now going to be filed this week with a request that the court address the claim with some urgency. So presumably there will be some follow-up with that over the coming weeks. But until then, I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.